Jesus wants us to follow him authentically. And even in our authentic following, we're allowed to have those emotional swings. You might be in an impossible situation. Mordecai in his story is a masterclass of what it means to navigate an impossible feeling situation. Faithfulness for us looks like being willing to use every resource at our disposal, even if it comes with a risk. Right? It was a massive risk for Esther to reveal who she was. Yet, in the spirit of wanting to be used by God, she took that risk anyway. And when we think about our resources, right, I don't know how many of you have a queen in a kingdom far away somewhere that you can call on, but you have intuition, right? You have common sense. You have a brain that you can use. When we pray, when we ask God to step into these moments with us, our prayers, like Esther and Mordecai's, ought to be used as catalysts for action, right? When you enter into this time of seeking from the Lord and wanting to know his will or how things are going to play out or what decision you ought to make, there comes a point in the scenario in which you might find yourself where you have to go. You have to move. You have to take the opportunity. Because God is going to do what God is going to do. But the invitation to be a part of it is what makes all of the difference for you and me. All right. So we're going to move into our epilogue here and see how this story plays out. We're on the home stretch. So Esther tells Mordecai she's going to go ahead and say what she needs to say, as it were, to Xerxes and make sure that she's aware. And she's going to go about doing this by asking him for a private audience with her. Not just with her and him, but she's going to bring Haman into the mix as well. And now, if I'm Mordecai and I hear that from Esther, I would think naturally like, all right, my job's done, right? The queen now is going to sit with the king and the guy who wants to kill all of us, and they're going to hash it out, the three of them, right? But you'll see that's not what happens in Mordecai's story. Mordecai continues to be about the city. He's moving in and out, and you know that Haman is still parading himself through there quite regularly. And so every time Haman sees Mordecai still refuses to bow to him. Now, if it's me, I'm reading this story thinking Mordecai's kind of like trolling him at this point. And so it makes Haman angrier and angrier and angrier. So much so that he devises a plan specifically on how he's going to kill Mordecai. And you can actually read about that in Esther, right? Like they measure it down to the inch or the cubit in that point. And it's this really gruesome and elaborate way. I mean, it's crazy the ways that he wants Mordecai to die. And so what Haman's going to do is the morning of that private feast with Esther and the king, he's first going to see the king individually and ask Xerxes to kill Mordecai. And so what we see in this moment here is now the kind of the full epic of the story is going to be beginning its downward spiral. Right? There's an impasse that we are arriving at as the reader. They're to know that Haman has this plan, Esther has this plan, and the fate of the Jewish people is at stake. Only one person is going to be able to win. So there's this real kind of cross section here. And one night when Xerxes is trying to sleep, but he can't, he has some people who work for him come and they're reading him the history of his kingdom. Right? Because of course, as a king, you like to hear about all the great stuff you've done in battle and all the peoples you've conquered, right? Nothing makes you sleep like a baby more than that. And so he calls them in and they're reading these stories. And then it gets to the part in the annals of their chronicled history of the fact that there's this guy that stopped this plot about the two people who are going to come and kill Xerxes. And he remembers, oh, that's Mordecai. That's like that dude. And he finds out that they've never thanked him properly. There was no parade. There was no Starbucks gift card. There was no pat on the back. And so as he's realizing this and going about his morning, Haman approaches him. And Haman, before he can kind of get this word out of his mouth, Xerxes asks him a question first. He says this in Esther 6:6. He goes, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now, you're Haman, right? And you're like, perfect. I am the man, right? Xerxes loves me so much, he wants to honor me even more. And this is where the downfall of Haman officially begins, right? So if you read on in chapter 6, you find that Haman wants all of this stuff, right? Because he's thinking what he wants for himself. And so he's like, all right, Xerxes, if you're going to honor this person that you delight in, they should be treated, paid homage to, adored. In fact, you should go one step further and you should get him a robe that was worn by the king. And Xerxes is kind of sitting there listening to him talk, and he goes, and on top of that, you should get him a horse that the king has ridden. What he's trying to communicate here is like, this person that you want to pay honor to should be as close to the king as possible. So wearing the king's old clothes, riding a king's horse, all of those things are going to signify how close this person is to you and how important and how special and how awesome and how handsome and how strong and how marvelous and how wonderful this person is. So Xerxes is like kind of sitting back, thinks, he's like, yeah, that's a good idea. Go do all of that for Mordecai the Jew. And Haman is just floored. He's floored. So after he kind of picks up his jaw and puts it back in his face, right, you can imagine Xerxes goes like, hey, so what was the thing that you wanted to talk to me about? Right, so he knows now, right? Like his plan is going to have to be altered. He can't do what he wants to do. And so as the day goes on, right, he knows that he's still got this brunch appointment for mimosas with Esther and the king. And so he goes and he sees himself there. And then it's at this moment that things really get their worst. Esther brings up this whole thing, right? She ruins this perfectly good brunch by talking about how she's a Jew and she doesn't want to die, and how Haman's the bad guy and he needs to be taken care of. And so Xerxes is furious with Haman. In fact, immediately he has Haman killed. And then on top of that, to add insult to injury, he takes Haman's, all of his land, his servants, all of his stuff, and he gives it to Esther and Mordecai. His luck has officially run out. And what's more, Haman then has Mordecai write an edict. I'm not Haman. Xerxes has Mordecai write an edict in the name of the king that every Jew in his entire kingdom will be safe. They're not to be messed with. They can worship and practice their religion in peace. And every Jew from that point on in Xerxes' kingdom experiences this flourishing because of their willingness, Mordecai and Esther, to rise to the occasion, to be the faithful, loyal people that God was hoping they would be. This is the most beautiful part of the story, in my opinion, because Mordecai and Esther's faithfulness, but Mordecai specifically, his faithfulness to God in the midst of this overwhelming situation, shows us that in the entirety of this narrative, he doesn't stop following God. He has his North Star, his line in the sand that he's unwilling to cross. But he doesn't just stop there. Right? In this story, we get this beautiful picture of kind of heaven and earth walking in tandem with one another. Because in all of Mordecai's works, in all of the things that he does, it requires him to leverage the totality of who he is to be able to make a difference. Right? He's terrified at the thought of letting his daughter go, but he sends her. He has enough light to see the next step in front of him. And all throughout the story, moment after moment after moment, he's taking these steps. But you also see, what I think is really important why it's recorded in this book, you see the full humanity of Mordecai on display. When he weeps bitterly, when he's fearful, when he's angry, when he's sad, when he's scared, when he feels alone and abandoned. Right? This is why I think following the God of the universe is so powerful for us as Jesus followers. Jesus doesn't expect us to follow blindly or robotically. Right? Jesus wants us to follow him authentically, and even in our authentic following, we're allowed to have those emotional swings. That you might be in an impossible situation in your life today. You might be walking through something. Mordecai, in his story, is a masterclass of what it means to navigate an impossible feeling situation. So I want to put the 3 reminders back up on the screen, or these 3 takeaways for us, right? And I want to know which one, I want you to think about which one of these 3 that you really kind of need to think on, perseverate over this week in your walk with God. And here's what I'm going to encourage you to do, is as you're thinking of these things, right? Maybe you are in a spot where you know that there's a very clear action you should take at some point in your life there, but you know that you could potentially have a negative outcome. But the road is pretty clear, right? I want you to be praying that God would give you the courage that you need to take that step. Or for you, if the second one, sometimes faithfulness to God looks like being willing to disobey man, if you struggle, like with people pleasing, if you wrestle with not wanting to rock the boat, and it's costing you some of who you are as a person, some of your sincerity, some of your character even, ask God to give you conviction to be able to live that out well. And finally, if faithfulness for you, you need this week, being willing to use every resource at your disposal, even if it comes with risk. If you are somebody who is sitting on the sidelines, right, and you know you need to actually jump in the game, don't be satisfied with simply praying and never acting. Know that God is inviting you into something deeper and more and wants to use you in your situation. Because you see, there's so much that God wants to do. And if we are willing to, like Mordecai, be faithful and stay loyal, it leverages us to be vessels of his grace and love for a world that needs it deeply.